OMG, baby, tell him.
Hey there, welcome to yet another episode of Powered by Backers. I have a great guest today, Ron Tite. Ron, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Awesome. So I will do as best I can with this bio. There's a lot. There's a lot. So hopefully
you can say here's Ron. You just here's Ron.
Here's Ronnie. No, just kidding. That's Johnny. But okay, I'll do a quick little bio, and then we'll jump into it. So Ron, you is a best-selling author, speaker, producer, and entrepreneur. You've blurred the lines between art and commerce. You've been an award-winning advertising writer and creative director for some of the world's most respected brands, including Air France, Evian, Fidelity, Hershey, Johnson & Johnson, Kraft, Intel, Microsoft, Volvo, and many others. Named one of the top 10 creative Canadians by Marketing Magazine. You're the founder of Church and State, host and executive producer of the hit podcast, The Coup, and publisher of This Is That Travel Guide to Canada, a best-selling and award-winning satirical book. You've written for television, penned a children's book, wrote, produced, and performed a hit play, which I'd like to hear about, created a branded art gallery, and was executive producer and host of the award-winning comedy show, Monkey Toast. I think there's another paragraph there, but I'm gonna leave it at that. Welcome to the show, Ron. Thank you very much for taking the time to join me here today. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. That was a long-winded introduction. Someone's got to cut that down. Someone's got to cut that down.
Well, when you've done a lot, there's a lot to be said, right? So
it sounded like a lifetime achievement award. Like he's really old. Let's get this.
No. It didn't. I'm expecting another 3 paragraphs by the time the lifetime.
I'm not.
Award. No. Okay, that's okay. Interesting. Okay, so I don't know. I guess where to begin. I mean, why don't we sort of begin at the beginning? Why don't you give me a Cole's Notes of sort of Ron in the beginning and what brought you into, because there's sort of like writer, creative, marketing, advertising. I mean, obviously there's a huge connection between the two, but what brought you to that point? I think I froze there for a second. What brought you to this point, or where did it all begin?
It's just weird now that, I just turned 50, and it's weird.
Recently? Happy birthday.
In June.
In June, okay. Well, happy belated couple. Yeah. I was going to say, like, my son's birthday is actually on Sunday, so we're kind of in the birthday weekend.
How old is he?
He'll be 7.
Incredible. Happy birthday to your son.
Yeah, exactly. Today was the Tooth Fairy showed up, or yeah. Anyways, that's another story for another time.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting just that that the reason I said that is because that so many things from over the years, from the past 30, well, I guess past 50 years, but they're all kind of coming together in this, so it might seem like a disparate, random kind of series of activities. And in some sense they are, but they really are, they've come into their own as this unique kind of perspective, I guess.
Well, they're all creative based, right? So you're obviously very creative.
In some ways, yeah. But I mean, what's really weird is I didn't start out thinking I was going to be a creative in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
I always liked comedy, but I didn't do my first stand-up set until I was 26 or something like that.
Interesting. Okay.
Of my own, I guess. But I was like, if you want to go back, like high school, I was like hosting and doing stuff on stage and kind of speaking, and not speaking as we now know it, but
hosting. You had a presence. You had sort of that lead, like
I was comfortable on stage.
Right, on stage.
Yeah, I was very comfortable on stage, and I think that goes to my like Italian Quebecois background of just like people being really animated and not being afraid to stand up because it was a family of like 100 people kind of thing.
Right. Every dinner was a on stage, right? Now, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. And I learned a lot about that from my aunts and uncles and stuff. But it's kind of this weird thing where I went like out of that, and then, but grew up quite poor, didn't really have anybody in my family that went to, into my immediate family, went to university. Just didn't know what that world was about. Went to Queens to do phys ed because I was gonna.
That's what I took at Brock. It's gonna be a phys ed teacher. Yeah, I took phys ed at Brock. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and the only reason I did that was because I didn't I was going to be a teacher.
I did not see that. I didn't, BPHE I have a BPHED. So I was like, well, I'm going to get a PhD. But anyways, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, you're going to be a teacher. So very much the same sort of mindset, I guess, at that time for me as well. Interesting. So what took you away from, did you become a teacher or?
No. So there was like two things. I think I defaulted to that, right? Because I didn't know anything else. Like, I don't know. I just want to be like my wrestling coach. So I'll just
I like sports. That was my choice. It was like, I like sports. Why not be a phys ed teacher, right?
Yeah. It seemed like a good gig.
Yeah.
And then I like slightly before going away to school, I went to camp for the first time.
Okay.
And I didn't know that world existed either. And it was like, what do you mean people go to camp? Who goes to? And my mom's like, oh, we can't afford to send you. Yeah, it's a lot of money. And so when I was 17 and I could work at a camp, I applied and I went there, and I went to this like great camp called Camp Kennebec, some still lifelong friends from there. Wow, and I saw this there were some folks who were pretty wealthy and like campers and stuff. And I was like, what does your dad do? Like, this guy's got a Ferrari. Like, what, you know? And then this whole other world opens up where you're like, what do you mean you start your own bit? Like, I just wasn't exposed to anything like that.
Right.
So it was just kind of being exposed to different things, like at camp. And then I went to Queens and then saw everything there. And so by the time fourth year came around, I was like, I don't want to teach anymore. There are other things. There's nothing wrong with that as a career choice. Right. It was just like, I just didn't want to do it. So I started working in the business school at Queens.
Okay.
And so that's when I got this like business perspective that I hadn't known before.
Right.
And started helping launch the National Executive MBA program. So there was this tech thing. Okay. And then this is 1993. So this is the rise of the internet, right? So I'm now getting this like the competitive nature of sports from phys ed with a business perspective, with entrepreneurialism, starting a whole new executive MBA that had never been done before, with a tech insurgence of stuff that had never been done before, with the internet coming in, all that kind of stuff. And I was just like plunked down in the middle of it.
Right.
And so then I started working in kind of for a web shop and then into advertising. And then I was an account guy in advertising and then started doing comedy. And so now I've like reaching back to high school kind of thing, start doing comedy. And then that morphed into speaking.
Okay. Interesting. You kind of froze there for a second.
And you froze.
Yeah, we both froze.
Oh, no.
Are you there? Hold on. We're there. You're frozen, Ron. Can you hear me? Let's see if we can get Ron. Hey there, welcome to Powered by Backers. I'm joined here by my guest, Ron Tite. Ron, thank you very much for joining me this morning. This is sort of a round two, had a little bit of technical difficulties, but thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate you being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I'm going to go through that all again. You're going to hear your bio again for all that didn't hear it. So you have been named one of the top 10 creative Canadians by Marketing Magazine. You're a best-selling author, speaker, producer, and entrepreneur. Always blurred the lines between art and commerce. It's been an award-winning advertising writer, creative director, and for some of the world's most respected brands. I won't go through all the names of the brands. You're founder of Church and State, host and executive producer of the hit podcast The Coup, and publisher of This Is That Travel Guide to Canada, a best-selling and award-winning satirical book. You've written for television, penned a children's book, wrote, produced, and performed a hit play, created a branded art gallery, and was executive producer and host of the award-winning comedy show Monkey Toast. I think that's almost like sounded like a what's the Cat in the Hat, like a host Monkey Toast. It's like everything was rhyming there.
That's right.
Well, anyways, thanks, Ron, for joining me this morning.
It's just something I do sometimes.
Exactly.
Princess Bride fans.
Yeah, and then just throw in the rhymes. Princess Bride, exactly. Should I drink this cup or that? Yeah, that's the whole dilemma. That's the one of the best movies ever. Okay, anyway, so we were talking, kind of got cut off, some technical difficulties, but you were giving your backstory. Why don't we start sort of early days? Phys ed major, as am I. Stand-up comedian. I did it once. I was going to mention that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But give us sort of the backstory just quickly of where you came from and what got you to where you are today.
What got me to where I am today is charm. No, it's certainly not talent. Not talent. I know. So it's just like a weird, bunch of things and random experiences. I think that I always kind of pursued what I thought was really interesting and stuff I wanted to figure out. And and I didn't let like titles and like I did a phys ed degree, and it was like, well, I don't need to do that. Like I'll just I can pursue something else. And when I kind of got to the end of the fourth year, I didn't really have that exposure of other people who had, in my family, of other people who had been to university or owned their own business or anything like that. And so I just kept getting exposed to more things. And as you get exposed to more things, your passions and interests really you can focus in on the stuff where you're really curious and interested about. So I did a phys ed degree and then went to work in the business school at Queen's to help launch the National Executive MBA program. And so that was like this weird thing because on one hand, it was working within a university, like obviously a big, ivory tower, bureaucratic kind of place. But at the same time, it was in the business school and it was launching in a completely new program, the first in North America. So I was, kind of learning from an entrepreneur at that point. It was a huge entrepreneurial endeavor. And it was tech because it was video conference MBA. So now I get this, technology perspective. Okay. And then this is the rise of the internet. So I'm getting the internet
early days. Yeah, you said 1993, sort of in that time frame, right?
Yeah,
the early days of the internet.
So I've got all these things kind of in those first 3 years, a little bit of entrepreneurialism, technology, internet, marketing, academia, big organization, all that stuff.
Right.
And what was really interesting was working with the faculty at Queen's to deliver that program. And so then I started to get like this eye on like, oh wait, this guy, he's not a prop, like he's a consultant and he speaks. And how much does he get paid to speak? Like, so I start to see education and corporate development, all that stuff.
Right.
And then I just then left there and then started to pursue things individually.
Okay.
And so like everything that was there. So on one hand, I love the performance aspect of stuff. So I started to pursue comedy and started training at Second City. And then started doing stand-up.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, I've done one set of stand-up comedy. I met a guy through friends and they were doing a show. And basically he was like, we're doing a show in a couple of weeks. It was a bunch of guys from the Mike Bullard show. So we're talking like 10, 15 years ago and probably 15 plus years ago. And they were like, hey, you can be the opener. We need an opener. You've never done it before. Yeah. We'll pay you in beer. Show up, do a 10-minute set or 5 minutes or whatever, and we'll see how it goes. Apparently, it was kind of funny, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and what was your kind of entry into that world. Second City, I looked into it, but tell me a little bit about that because I'm sure there's not a lot of people that are familiar with that world.
No, it's a weird world. And I was always driven by the fact that I just wanted to figure it out. Like I wasn't, and a lot of people do what you did, right? Which is like, I'm going to do it once. I'm going to do an open mic night kind of thing. And I kind of equate that to kind of like going bungee jumping.
Right.
We're like, people do this, a one-time thing. And then I
thought I would try it more times, but I just never really got back into it. That was the idea, but
yeah. So I was like very different in that. And it wasn't like, I'm here to do this as a career. I think I'm going to, that wasn't the goal, but it was like, I'm going to figure this out. And this isn't a one-time thing.
Yeah. You were determined to be sort of competitive at it. So you mentioned this in competitive. Did you play sports growing up? Obviously you took phys ed. What sports did you play growing up? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I was a wrestler for the most part in high school and played club in high school.
Okay.
But it was that kind of found its way, I guess, a little bit into stand up. But I took this is where this interesting perspective on stand up is. You went through one odd way to start. There's two ways you can start comedy.
Right.
One is you go to, like a Yuck Yucks and you sign up for an open mic night back when people used to gather in public places. And you'd go.
2020, right?
Yeah. And you'd go, okay, I'm going to put my name down. And then they'd call you and you do 5 minutes. And then you just keep going back every Monday night until they go, hey, you got a pretty tight 5. Why don't you come back on Tuesday and open for somebody?
Right.
And so that's one way to do it. I went to just check it out. And I'm just going to see this. And it was a shit show. Like, it was just, I was like, I'm not this. Like, I'm not these guys. I'm like, that guy lost a bet. That guy's drunk. Like, I'm not doing that.
Right.
I'm already more serious than everybody in this room about it. I'm not doing it this way.
Right.
So I went to my friend Steve Patterson and said, like, hey, what else can I do? And he's like, well, I guess, like you did, Justin. He's like, you could find a producer who's producing a show and convince them to give you 5 minutes, even though you've never done it before.
Right. I don't know how it just happenstance, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah.
So then I just thought, well, I'm not doing that either. Why don't I just make myself the producer?
Produce
my own show. So I produced my own show. And so the very first time I ever did stand-up comedy with my own material, I headlined and did a 45-minute set.
Of your own show. So who were your openers? Who did you get to?
My openers were my good friends. So Steve Patterson hosted it, who's now the host of The Debaters on CBC.
Okay.
He hosted. Some friends from Buffalo came up and did improv, and they integrated Aurora Brown, who is now in Baroness Fun Sketch Show. So Aurora was a part of that group. And then Urban Myth, who were old friends of mine, James Russell, Todd Aiken, and Nick Kindler, who I went to Queens with. They were a really established and funny sketch troupe, and they agreed to open as well.
Interesting.
So it was, and then I did the second half as a headliner for my very first time ever.
Wow. Where did you host it? Where was it?
It was at the Second City at a place at that point that was called the Tim Sims Playhouse.
Okay.
And it was, 110, I think, seat theater. And we sold it out and gave the money to charity and stuff.
Very cool.
But it was I didn't say like, hey, I'm doing stand-up. I said, I'm kicking off my stand-up.
I'm gonna be the top of the game here. So had you already started at Second City at that point, or so you were already kind of
Yeah, I had started at Second City in the training center.
Right.
There were a group of us. It was interesting. Me, Aurora from Baroness, and Bruce Sellery, who was an old friend from Queens as well. But Bruce is now, you've probably seen him on City Line, and he was a former BNN anchor, host of Moolah. And we were in a group of people that were like, let's just take this outside of the Second City thing. Let's just get together as people who are interested in developing stuff, and let's just see where it takes us.
Right.
And so we each did our own thing. And so I ended up like hooking Aurora up with Urban Myth, and she started her sketch career and ended up on the Second City main stage. Bruce decided he wanted to combine his love of business with his love of performance. He left P&G, went on to host a show on CBC, and then his entire career.
Right.
And then I was like, I'm going to do stand-up. Like, that's what I really want to do.
Yeah.
And I just pursued that.
And so you did that. How long were you doing stand-up, or sort of what was the trajectory into now sort of church and state, hosting other, podcasts? What's the transition there? Writing books, writing your own play. Was that another example of, hey, I don't want to be in a play, I'm going to make my own play? Oh, we lost it again. How do we lose the internet again? No, we're back. I think my phone, we're back. You there, Ron? Hey, Ron? It just came back.
Oh, okay. I'll dial back in. Luckily.
Yeah. Is your internet working, Connie? All right, so we were just talking about your stand-up comedy, so which is interesting, and kind of how you got into it. I love the fact, what I was actually asking was, you mentioned that you've produced a play, right? Written and produced a play. My question was, did you decide you wanted to be in a play like comedy rather than trying to audition? I'm going to write my own play. Is that sort of the same mindset of that went down, or?
No,
no?
It's interesting, right? Because you can come at stuff from like a writer perspective, or you can come at it from a performer perspective.
Right.
And so I came at it from both of those angles.
Okay.
Because I wrote it and performed in it. It was a one-man play.
Okay.
And
what was it called?
It was called The Canadian Baby Bonus.
Okay.
And so there were a couple of things there. So, as any ad person knows, like you can come up with a campaign idea, but what's the campaign idea in TV, and how does it execute in print, and how does it execute as a billboard?
Right.
And you can do that. So I wanted to, after I had done stand-up for a while, I was like, well, how do you take a stand-up approach and make it a play? Like, how do you make that move to stage where it's not you talking, it's a character, but can that comedy perform the base of a great play? And how do you write that? And so I worked with a guy named Ian Ferguson, who I ended up suing for stealing some material of mine, but that's a whole other story.
Okay.
But
we'll leave that for part 2 of the interview, right? There
yeah.
Yeah.
But Ian was a dramaturge. And so, his lesson in the development of the play was like, you need to expose the emotional underbelly for the play. What is the stuff? What are the emotional things that connect all the funny bits?
Right.
And how do you tell that story, but go, this is kind of what inspired the joke? And how do you do that in character form? And then how do you block it? And what are the props and all that kind of stuff? So for me, it was as much a creative exercise to go, how do I take that and write it in this way? And then once I got into that, and now I got to perform it. And I'm like, writing the emotional part was one thing, but performing it, that's a whole other skill set.
Right.
And so I did that. And that's when I think was like one of the big light bulbs went on, where to have a room of people be absolutely silent. And, I've told this story before, but near the end of the run, there was a part in the play where I say this line, like, so, hey, be careful. And there's a beat, like, so, hey, be careful. And it's a callback to something earlier in the play. And the room is silent. It's a serious part of the play. It's silent. The room is silent. And I say, so, hey. And then in the front row, this woman goes, and when she just had that inhalation of breath, I was like, I've got her right where I've got her control. I've got her in the palm of my hand.
Right.
And that, you can't imagine how powerful that is to feel that on stage. Where like my performance and the writing has got her to the place that I could take her wherever I want to take her now. And that insight of like, comedy can be really powerful after the punchline, just as powerful, if not more powerful, after the punchline than before the punchline. How do you then use comedy to set up what's really important or what's really emotional? And that took my writing into a whole other thing. And that's when I started exploring speaking.
Interesting. And so what got you into sort of the marketing advertising? Like, where was that sort of transition? Or has that always kind of been at the underbelly along the way while you're doing the comedy, and I would call acting or producing or writing or all of the above? The jack of all trades.
So I did I marketed, part of my job at Queen's was marketing that program. So I got a little bit of insight into marketing, although my colleague Sandra Milan was much better and more knowledgeable at it than I was.
Right.
Then I went to work for this web shop, and that was like taking brands into the internet. So taking newspapers and putting them on the internet.
Right.
And because nobody had done that before. And so that started my interaction from a marketing and business standpoint. And I taught myself a little bit of HTML, and I was an account guy, project manager, kind of what people do when they're 25, 26 years old.
Right.
And then we were the web shop.
Or they used to do when they were 25.
Or what they used to do.
Now they don't want to do anything. But anyways, that's probably a discussion for another time as well.
So I was there, and we were the internet partner of an ad agency.
Right.
Of a small ad agency. And when I decided to leave that web company, the chairman of the ad agency pulled me in and said, why don't you come work for us?
Right.
And he's like, did you ever think of working in advertising? I was like, nope. And that was Bill Sharp. Wow. And he goes, it's not rocket science. Like, you'd be good at this. come on
So
over.
were you doing kind of both at the same time as you're doing the stand-up and the speaking? And
I hadn't actually, at that point, that was the summer of 1997. I hadn't quite done stand-up yet. I think it wasn't until 98, I think maybe, that I did stand-up.
Okay. So you end up doing both sort of throughout your career then for a number of years there. Do you still, I mean, I'll ask a question. What's the largest sort of audience you've ever presented, let's say, spoken in front of, done at, your one?
I think it was like 5,000 people.
Wow.
Okay. 7,000 people, something
so
like that.
Does the size change the dynamic?
Now, to be fair, for your listeners, you also have to ask, what's the smallest crowd?
The crowd of 0 or 2
people.
Okay, I was gonna say, how small can you get, right? The crowd of 1 is, I mean, I feel like I have a crowd of 1 or 2. I have 2 kids all day, every day, right? That's my audience. Interesting. So that's funny. You showed up to a presentation or some sort of performance, and there was expected more than 2, or?
It was the first time I performed the play in Edmonton at the Edmonton Fringe Festival. Okay. Because at the beginning of the Fringe Festival, before the reviews have come out, people don't know what to see.
Right.
And so everybody flocks to the people they know, and nobody knew me. So they're like, man, what? I don't know this guy. So I got 2 people, and both of them were critics. Now,
that's a good 2 people to have if you do a good show, right?
Yes. So that I was like, all right. And who really helped me in that moment was the crew, because there was a crew there, and so I would do the show and had the same crews in the same venue, but they were vets. They knew plays and they knew everybody else who was on.
Right.
And and the guy goes, you got 2 people here. And I go, what? Fuck. And then everything, I'm like, I'm such a failure. I'm everything. And he sat me down. He's like, listen to me. You got a great show. And by the end of this run, I'm telling you, this place is going to be sold out. Right. So don't worry about it. Like, this happens all the time.
Yeah.
These people will be impressed. Put your head down.
And just do it.
And perform the fuck out of this play.
Right.
For these 2 people. Pardon my French.
And so I assume it was sold out by the end of the festival, or you were getting
the third show. By the third show, we sold out the rest of the run.
Awesome.
Because word gets around. They're like, oh, you got to see this play.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good. I mean, that's sort of in life, right? There's sort of tipping points or turning points or sort of forks in the road where, some people might choose to kind of, not give it their all and sort of get down on themselves and sort of let the opportunity slide, whereas you were able to obviously do what you were there to do, regardless of who was watching, and give it your all. And then obviously that led to, word of mouth. And the idea that it was 2 critics, I'm sure is a bonus, right? If it was just 2 random people, their word doesn't get out as well, or as quickly, right? So interesting. So let's sort of transition. Let's talk about your entrepreneurial vision. I mean, this is all sort of entrepreneurial, right? You're doing your own shows, you're writing your own plays, comedy, you're writing your own jokes. Tell me about church and state. I mean, I get the concept from a sort of the separation of church and state. So tell me a little bit about what brought you to church and state, and what exactly does church and state do? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, so I was an account guy in advertising, and then eventually made my way as a creative and went, kind of copywriter, senior copywriter, associate creative director, executive creative director, with a series of agencies, most of which were headed by Bill Sharp and Tom Blackmore. And so we were a great team with a bunch of other people who were all phenomenal.
Right.
And I just grew kind of with them. And then at some point it was like, I want to do my own thing. Like, it was this perfect storm. Like, speaking was starting to really pick up and develop. And I felt guilty of having a department of people but I wasn't there a lot. And I knew that I just wanted to control my own destiny. 2 things. One, I wanted to control my own destiny more.
Right.
Kind of take gigs that I wanted to take and not take the ones I didn't want to take. And I also thought that advertising was changing drastically, and I wanted a chance to figure it out on my own and do it the way I wanted to do it.
Right.
And so I quit. And I, a lot of people were like, I'm out of here. Like, it wasn't, those are wonderful people. And it was a great environment.
Right.
And then so what I did was I started talking to what I thought was the marketing and advertising ecosystem, which includes national broadcasters and national newspapers and magazines and media sellers and media buyers and planners and clients and digital agencies and social agencies and TV agencies and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually clients. And I thought that nobody was actually looking at the ecosystem, that everybody was going, it's an agency problem. It's a client problem. It's a, news, traditional media problem.
Right.
And I was like, but these worlds they're all interconnected. I mean, you can point the finger at CTV, right, but you should also be pointing the finger at Procter and Gamble. You should also be pointing the finger at Leo Burnett. And
right.
They're all dependent on one another.
And so what was the what seemed to be the problem? Like, are they just miscommunication, or like they couldn't come together?
It's a great question. This was the response I got from everybody. And I'll act it out. You're going to share the video of this, right?
Yeah, of course. We're going to get some first. This is the first crack of this show. Okay.
So every person I interviewed with, regardless of who they were, where they were, this is how it went. They'd go, and I go, so how, like, are things good here? Like, do you like it? Are there challenges? Like, and they'd go, this place is fucked up.
Yeah.
But not me.
Right. So it was everyone else's fault. They look around the room, see who's listening, but it was everyone else's fault. Right?
Yeah. And they're like, it's crazy. Nobody gets it. I get it. But nobody gets it. And so I thought that the problem with why that was the problem was that everybody saw the situation, but nobody wanted to change themselves.
Right.
Nobody wanted to be the person to go, I'll put my hand up, I'll change what I do.
It's really difficult to be that sort of leader or kind of to step out from everyone else and be a little different.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to be that guy to change. I'm going to change what I do. I'm going to change how I do it. And I'm going to deal with that unification of church and state, even though the agency wasn't called Church and State in the beginning, it was called the Tite Group. Okay. And so I promised myself I wouldn't work with any client organizations I'd worked with before, and I wouldn't work with any people I'd worked with before. And it was all going to be fresh and new. And it was, yeah. And that's,
so it was 2011, right? Or around 2010, 20. So let me
2012 by the time I started the agency. Yeah.
Okay. So let me sort of ask deeper into it. Like, what were, if you could say sort of specifics, what were the issues that needed to be changed that no one was addressing that you were able to address? Like, tactically, like what were some of the things that were happening that you were trying to change?
I thought that for everybody to survive, that two things needed to happen. One, the brands needed to act like media properties. I thought they needed to create their own content. I thought they needed to distribute their own content. I thought they needed to act with journalist integrity. I thought that they needed to remove the sales bias from a lot of their messages. I thought they had to stop pitch slapping, because it was in the realization.
Pitch slapping. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, it's just a battle for time. And they can win the battle for time. They can totally win the battle for time. If you're Microsoft and you want to write content about technology, you have thousands of people who are researching and who are experts in technology. They're in it every single day. You can create some compelling, beautiful, amazing educational content.
Right.
You can do that. So that's the one thing. The second thing was that media properties needed to act like brands. So brands needed to act like media properties, and media properties, to survive, needed to act like brands. They need to extend different distribution mechanisms. They needed different SKUs. They had a brand. What brands do really well is crank out different SKUs and monetize and extend the brand into other places. Media companies are like, we're a radio, station. That's what we do. You're like, no, you're not. Like, you have to stand for something more than that. And right now, you happen to deliver that message in radio, but there is no reason why you couldn't have a magazine. And, the fact that we don't have a news program called the Globe and Mail is ridiculous. With that integrity,
you mean like a TV program, like kind of a media versus just
what we
newspaper?
Do in print. This is what we do on television or on the internet.
Well, they figure you've got global news is sort of the television, and you've got 1010 or whatever talk
Yeah, but those are all
640.
completely different brands.
Right.
owned
No,
by
that's what I
different
mean. They're
people.
all different. That's what I mean. So they're just assuming somebody else is doing it, maybe. Just so to clarify. So you saying a media property is the outlet, if you will, and then the brand is the product, and you're thinking there needed to be sort of a crossover between the two, where the media property or outlet, it needed to create its own brand and then to create multiple outlets. So newspaper becomes
They would say they would have said they think, no, we're a brand. We think like brands. So they actually didn't, right? They defined the brand by the mechanism in which it was distributed.
right. So they were a newspaper
brand.
Right.
Yeah. And that's it. And it's like, that's like Nike saying we just make tennis shoes,
Right.
like that's not good for anybody.
Right.
So I thought that's what they needed to do. And we started to see that with convergence kind of coming in. They still haven't figured it out. I don't think. I think some people are doing an interesting thing.
I guess let me ask you a question then. Who on both sides do you see as being kind of maybe that people you're working with that are media outlets that are doing well on the branding, or brands that are doing well on the sort of content?
So I think in places, I think if you want the gold standard from a content perspective, you need to look at what Rogers has done in sports. Let's just look what they've done in sports, okay?
Okay.
And I'm not saying that Rogers itself is the be-all and end-all, because they've messed it up in a whole bunch of other different places. But let's look at sports. And this was one of my first realizations. Okay, I turned on a program called
Cup?
No, it was, I think at that point it was called Primetime Sports. Remember, it was the Bob McCowan kind of show, right?
Yeah.
So I turned on my TV and I'm now watching Bob McCowan and Stephen Brunt and somebody else talk. But let's break this down. Primetime Sports, when it was on the air, was actually a radio show.
Right.
It was a radio show that Rogers owned, appearing on a radio station, Fan 590, that Rogers owned. They put a couple of cameras in the corner. Now suddenly Rogers has taken a radio program. They've multi-purposed. They've recreated it for a television environment. Right. And now you've got a television program owned by Rogers, airing on a Rogers-owned sports broadcast network. Right. And then when you cut to commercial break, what are they selling? Well, they're airing Rogers commercials for Rogers Mobile, right. For the cell phones. But what really ties the whole thing together, the only thing that makes the whole thing possible, is that every single person in that entire line needs something to talk about. What do they talk about? Toronto Blue Jays.
Right,
they own
Rogers,
that too.
They own that. Maple Leafs.
So
yeah,
that to me is the quintessential unification of church and state. So when Rogers on Rogers Sportsnet, on Sports Central or whatever their news program is, when they go, our lead story tonight is the Blue Jays have made the playoffs. Is that really the lead story? Or is it the lead story because they own the team and they want to drive bums in seats and stuff? Right. And I'm not saying that makes them evil. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And viewers will decide whether they've crossed that line of like, this is getting pitch slappy now, and brands will do that. And like we will cross that line. We just need to be comfortable with saying like, oh, that's where it is. Okay, I'm gonna come back here. But Ron, what they've done in sports, they should be duplicating in business. And I've told them that there is a way to go. This is what we do in sports. We can duplicate that exact model with business. So business audience, business events, business content.
Okay, so let's on air here. Let's see if how would that look? I'm trying to think through it. Would they own the TD Towers? Would they own Rogers Towers and host a radio show and have a mutual fund company called Rogers?
So here's what they would do.
What are your thoughts on that? Yeah, you give me.
They would create a sports brand. Let's call it Rogers Business, RBiz, whatever.
RBiz, yeah.
So RBiz. So they do a deal with the Toronto Star and they make the business section of the Toronto Star their business section, right? Okay, so that they get some print stuff out there. They create a business magazine because they used to own used to own Canadian business, and they gave that away. And so, but they need a Canadian business magazine. The person who shows up on City TV to do the business reporting is representing that business news. They do live business events back when we get to doing that, which they kind of do sometimes for small business, right. But they don't really brand it in a way that's that compelling. And they have a business TV show that airs on Rogers.
Yeah, I was going to say, couldn't they do like on those local Rogers channels, maybe do like a BNN? I know BNN exists, but RNN,
they can't do the community
RNN?
thing.
No.
They can't do the community thing,
No.
but they could do it on City TV. They could do a program on City TV
called RNN.
Or they can duplicate that and air it on 680 News as a, like, there's a way to brand a Rogers business brand that gets them back into that. And here's why they need to do it, because the business audience is a premium audience.
Right.
And
they're the ones buying the phones
you
and
get business brands.
Yeah.
You get sophisticated and premium brands that want to speak to a business audience. And it gives you a way into B2B audiences. So thought pieces with emails and like all that kind of stuff. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But there's the reason they haven't been able to do it, in my own humble opinion, is because they've got the traditional media folks who are taken care of. Like, who does their podcast division report into? I'm a part of their podcast. My podcast airs on their podcast division. Okay. And they're lovely people. And I'm thankful for the opportunity they gave us. Who do they report into? Radio.
I was going to say nobody. Maybe they're just a standalone, but they report into radio. Okay.
They report into radio. And so I want to do this deal to do, we're going to promote the podcast. You go through the radio people with the radio salespeople. Now, are they going to dial down old media to dial up new media? And again, they're not horrible people. They're lovely people. They're really smart, but they're stuck in legacy processes like many large organizations are. Now, Jordan Banks is the new president of Rogers Media, and I think he's kind of a new world kind of guy who can bring a lot of thinking to that. But it's got to be more than one person. Right. And culture has to change. And I think it's not just Rogers. Bell could do it, and CBC could do it. The fact that BNN is really the only outside of trade verticals is the only mass business brand in this country is ridiculous.
Right. Interesting. How about like the university route too? Like you've got the Ted Rogers School of Business at Ryerson.
They got to stop putting his name on stuff. That's Rogers' ego, right? I mean, the fact that there's a Ted Rogers, there's a statue of Ted Rogers outside Skydome or Rogers Center. That's ridiculous. Come on. You put baseball players. You make statues of baseball players, not owners.
All right.
He's got about 400 billion reasons why he doesn't need a statue, or he had. As you know, I've never met him, but as wonderful a man as apparently he was. But that to me is the ego of the family going, we're going to put our name on everything, opposed to let's create credible brands here.
So do you think Rogers then, do you think the Rogers without Ted in front of it as a brand versus Ted Rogers as the person being commemorated?
Yeah, it's certainly gone well beyond the family now. But if you look at the share structure, I mean, that family still controls that company.
Right.
And as a Blue Jays fan, there's nothing that worries me more when Ed Rogers decide to get involved in the baseball issues of the day.
Hey, they're going to the playoffs. First time in 4 years.
No, trust me, it's amazing.
Only because 8 teams make it in this year.
They're
not going to the playoffs if it's a regular year. They're third in the East.
Doesn't matter.
They got a good young team though. It's exciting to see some of the guys coming up. Probably another talk for another time. So, anyways, Ron, I don't want to keep you. I know you said you got a bit of a hard stop here in a bit. Typically, and I really appreciate you joining me and sort of fighting through and patience with the slight technical difficulties we had.
All good.
But this is about my 50th episode, so I'm just kind of getting started on this.
Amazing.
With backers. So not quite at the podcast. We're just purely video. We send it out. I'll share the video with you so you can share it with your people as well. But typically end off with one question and kind of ties it all in with your sort of experience. And I think you've had obviously a very interesting career. If there was one sort of word or one kind of piece of advice that you could give to a younger Ron, or if you could go back and talk to a younger Ron or somebody else coming up, through the, sort of the early days of their career, what would that one word or what would that kind of piece of advice be for someone starting out or a younger Ron?
If it was a younger Ron, it was don't change a thing because things are pretty happy in life in general.
Do what you did?
Yeah, well, no, I don't think other people should do what I did. I think only Ron should do what I did.
Right.
But I think it's don't feel the pressure to do what everybody does. And there is a path, right? You go to phys ed, you got to become a gym teacher. You do and again, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Right.
But I just worry that some people, they live a life based on a decision they made in grade 12. And it's like that's not fair.
But they know nothing about the world whatsoever. Exactly.
No. So I just kept making interesting. I think I just tried to just be greedy with my own interest and curiosities and passions and chase that, and the money and whatever, all that other stuff. Like it's just bullshit. It's just like, it'll happen.
Yeah.
But and I think like I didn't get married till I was 42, or 43, turning 43. So, that was like don't need to do the thing that everybody does at 30. Until it feels right. And so
I'm 42 right now, and 42 apparently is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. 42 is the answer to everything.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So
my favorite line from that, which is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, for those who don't know the reference, is and the ships hung in the sky much in the same way that bricks don't.
Right. Exactly.
Everything you need to know about the tone of that book.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny because you mentioned like path. I took phys ed as well. I went actually, I taught English in Korea for a year. I didn't go to teachers college and was sort of figuring out what I was going to do. And it wasn't getting job offers with a phys ed degree, right? In 2001, it wasn't, the job market was, like you said, entry level jobs that, were not sort of what I was thinking I wanted to do, and went to Korea, taught English, came back, kind of got into business, into more sales, business development, finance, went back and did an MBA. And then now sort of the past 7-8 years, I've been on the entrepreneurial sort of venture, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
Actually, ironically, I'm wearing an old golf shirt from an old business. I started a home healthcare equipment business about 7 years ago. We had 2 retail stores.
Oh, wow.
Which we've since kind of folded, and now, obviously full-time running Backers, and started Backers to fund. I was looking for a way to fund a 3-on-3 professional hockey league that I had started.
Oh, wow.
Called the 3HL. Trying to compete sort of just below the NHL with the fast-paced end-to-end action. But that was the sort of inception of Backers, was trying to figure out how to fund the 3HL. Ended up coming across the concept of equity crowdfunding, having looked at sort of the Green Bay Packers community-owned, kind of locally owned team, and then saw that there was nothing in the marketplace to actually facilitate sort of the new rules and regulations around equity crowdfunding in Canada. So I decided to create my own platform. So that's kind of that with one night of stand-up comedy along the way. And many nights.
That's an entrepreneurial story, right? Of like this thing existed, or this thing didn't exist, and I needed it to exist.
Yeah.
And so I just created it on my own.
Right.
I just did it on my own.
It's the story that you said, where it's like, hey, should I go 5 minutes on the Yuck Yucks open mic, or do the route where I kind of beg or plead to be on somebody's show, or create your own show, right? I think that's the way to go, for sure. So I appreciate it, Ron. I think it's an amazing story. Where can they find you? I mean, obviously rontite.com is your site, but you obviously you're doing a couple different things. Your podcast, where can they find you on your podcast right now? The
podcast is through Rogers Frequency.
Okay.
But it's available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everywhere. It's called The Coup. COUP.
Yeah. Cool.
And
what is it? What is just? I'll apologize. I've never actually heard it. But what is it that you guys talk about?
Oh, so so we did 1 season only. We haven't done season 2 yet.
Okay.
We will, but it is a look at disruption and across a whole bunch of different categories. And so the idea of a coup is that insurgent forces perform a coup d'état on the establishment of an industry.
Right.
And how does a coup go down? It's really fun. It's we don't do like this. It's not a 2 people talking podcast. It is a very produced, very written podcast.
Wait, sorry. Let me just look to see where the producers are. No producers. Yeah. It's just me.
Yeah, no, we had like a team of like 5 people working on it.
Right. Cool.
For like a year.
I'll have to check it out. Appreciate again, Ron, for
Awesome.
joining me here, and good luck with everything going forward. And let's look for another, as you said, 3 paragraphs on that bio, right?
That's great.
Over
Thank
the
you.
next
Thanks
30
for everybody
years.
for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone else, yeah, exactly. All the guests, the audience. Thank you again for joining me here on Powered by Backers. Ron, again, cheers. Everyone,
Thanks.
have a great day. Thanks. Cheers.
I just did this. That's lame.
You did. Yeah, that's okay. That's sort of your
hang loose.
English. Yeah, hang loose. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Ron.
OMG, baby, tell him.